Zelira sat alone by the hearth, her knees curled to her chest, her eyes flickering with the dying flames. Ashes clung to her skin, fine gray dust coating her arms like a second skin. The floor was cold and the scent of char and smoke was all she knew. Yet her face, though streaked with soot, remained calm. Her eyes held no anger, no bitterness. Only patience. Each night, her stepmother would point toward the hearth and say, "That is where you belong, among what is burnt and useless." Her stepsisters would giggle, adjusting their silk wraps and spraying oils in their hair, pretending not to look her way. Yet Zelira would rise without a word, bow her head gently, and walk toward the fireplace like it were her throne. The hearth had once been warm, when her mother was alive. It had been the center of stories, of laughter, of food cooked with love. Now it was punishment. Now it was exile. But Zelira did not cry. The fire still whispered, and the embers still spoke in crackles and sighs. She heard them. And though she never spoke of it, the ashes felt like kin. In the mornings, the household would rise before dawn. The stepmother would parade her daughters outside where they would practice graceful bows, recite poetry, and prepare to be chosen for the next royal festival. Zelira would step outside after them, her feet bare, her face dark with ash, her dress a patchwork of cloth no one else claimed. Yet she walked with her back straight, her chin slightly raised, not out of pride, but as though she were balancing something unseen upon her head. The villagers whispered about her. "She's gone quiet," one said. "She doesn't even flinch when they mock her. She should run away." But Zelira never ran. She remained. She swept floors. She gathered wood. She helped children who cried, smiled at strangers, and never lifted her voice. People began to say her name with a touch of awe. Not because of what she had, but because of what she never gave away, her calm, her silence, her grace. One night, when the stepmother's cruelty was especially bitter, throwing leftover gruel into the ashes and forcing Zelira to eat from the floor, something changed. Zelira obeyed as always, picking from the ashes with fingers slow and calm. But as the others retreated into their chambers, the fire hissed louder than usual. The smoke rose in elegant curls, then bent low, like it was bowing. Zelira watched. A soft hum filled the hearth, deep and ancient. Her fingers trembled as she touched the ashes again, not with sorrow this time but reverence. That night, as she lay among the cinders, she dreamed of her mother. Not as she had been in life, but cloaked in light, her skin like burnished gold, her voice carried in wind. "My child," the voice said, "they try to bury you in what they believe is ruin. But ashes are not endings. They are beginnings." Zelira awoke with a start, the memory of the dream still clinging to her. And there, etched in the ash around her, was a perfect circle. Not drawn by her hand but shaped by something greater. A symbol. A crown. The next morning, the stepmother shrieked when she entered the kitchen. "Who made this mess?" Zelira rose from the hearth, slowly, gracefully. Her body was outlined in soot, but the ash beneath her formed patterns, swirls and crowns, spirals and runes. Her stepsisters gasped. "She did that," one whispered. "With what?" the other scoffed. "A burned stick." But the patterns grew day after day. Every morning, where Zelira had slept, the ashes spelled out shapes, rising crowns, open eyes, lines like vines growing toward the stars. Rumors began to spread. People came to the windows, peeking in before sunrise to see the girl in the hearth. Some left offerings of bread, cloth, or oil. Some whispered blessings into the air. And the patterns grew stronger. One evening, a boy with a limp came to the door. "My leg," he said shyly, "has never straightened. But the village says she carries healing in her calm." The stepmother scoffed. "She carries dirt, not healing." But Zelira stepped forward, placed her ashen fingers on the boy's knee, and sat with him by the hearth. She hummed softly, a tune her mother used to sing. When the boy left, his limp had not vanished, but he walked with more ease. He turned to look back at her 3 times before disappearing down the path. After that, others came. Women carrying sorrow, men dragging shame, children weighed with fear. Zelira sat with each. Never judging, never explaining. Just listening. Just being. And in her presence, something in them shifted. The stepmother grew restless. "She's a witch," she hissed. "She's a queen," one of the villagers whispered. When the royal messenger arrived in the village looking for a girl of fire and ash whose name stirs the wind, the stepmother grew pale. She dressed her own daughters in gold, rubbed ash on their cheeks and shoved them forward. But the messenger only laughed. "The one we seek does not play dress-up. The ash chooses her, not the other way around. That night, Zelira sat at the hearth as usual, but the fire danced taller than ever before. The flames rose like curtains parting for a stage. In the air, the soot swirled until it formed the faint shimmer of a crown above her head. The messenger knelt. "Princess Zelira, born of the old flame, daughter of truth, the kingdom calls you." She looked at him, then down at the ashes that had been her bed, her blanket, her prayer mat. She touched the hearth with one hand. "I am of this place," she whispered. "And I carry its memory." He nodded. "Then you will rise with it." In the morning the village gathered. Zelira walked through the crowd, not in silk but in the same threadbare dress. But as she moved, petals fell from the sky. Flowers that had not bloomed in years opened in her path. Birds sang melodies the elders remembered from long ago. And where her feet stepped, the ground warmed. She passed her stepmother, who could not meet her eyes. She paused. "I forgive you," Zelira said softly. "But the fire remembers." The woman fell to her knees. But Zelira had already moved on. At the palace they placed a golden circlet upon her head. Yet even with jewels and robes she often returned to the village. To the hearth. To the children. She let the ashes kiss her feet again. And every time she did, new patterns formed. A girl once left in cinders had become the flame itself, not burning in rage but glowing with purpose. Years later, when stories were told beneath moonlit skies, children would ask, "Is it true she slept in ashes?" "Yes," the elders would say. But those ashes spelled out a crown. Not given by others, but claimed by her soul. And in every fire that burned since, her name was remembered, not as the girl in the ashes, but as the girl who rose from them. Each morning, as the cold seeps from the hearthstones and the house stirs above her, Zelira opens her eyes to the familiar blanket of soot. Her breath mists faintly in the pale light slipping through the cracks, and ash clings to her eyelashes like gray snow. But it's not the cold that wakes her, not anymore. It's the whispers. They come softly at first, almost like dreams clinging to the edge of waking. A gentle hum beneath the skin of silence. Not voices exactly, but something more ancient, like breath exhaled from a memory too old to have a name. Zelira lies still, listening. She always listens. The stepmother's feet echo on the wooden floor above. The stepsisters laugh like glass being broken for fun. Their day begins in silk and perfume. Hers begins in soot. But lately, something else has been waiting for her when she opens her eyes. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the ashes, stirred by her breath or the movement of her blanket. But then it happened again. And again. The first shape was a spiral. Not a perfect one, but it curled like a question in the hearth dust. Then came others, a crescent like a moon, a curved line crossed with another. At first, Zelira dismissed them, thinking maybe her sleeping body rolled or twisted just so. Maybe the mice were playing again. But the ashes were deliberate. Each morning the shapes became more distinct. She stopped brushing them away. One morning she sat up slowly and stared, heart thudding as the pattern beneath her shimmered in the faint morning light. It wasn't just a shape, it was a symbol. A mark she had once seen in an old storybook. A glyph from the ancient tales her mother used to whisper before the stepmother silenced her voice forever. The mark meant watcher of hidden fire. She didn't tell anyone. The next morning the ashes had formed a new pattern. Lines that intersected and curled inward. Zelira's heart tightened. The shapes weren't random. They were speaking. Teaching. Waiting. By the fourth morning, she dared to trace the shapes with her fingertip before the household stirred. As she did, the ashes didn't smear as expected. They held form under her touch, even glowing slightly at the edges, like embers remembering their heat. She gasped softly, but the glow faded when her stepmother called her name from above. Zelira wiped it all away. No one must know. But each day after, the ashes returned with new messages. Some were symbols. Some, she realized, were letters. Old letters from the tongue of queens and prophets, a language long forbidden to be taught. A language her mother had taught her to read when no one was looking. The ashes were spelling something. A sentence. A warning. Or was it a promise? One morning she read it clearly. The fire bows to patience. She blinked, reading it again. The letters vanished as soon as the morning light hit them fully, as if the dawn feared their meaning. She said nothing. But inside, a quiet tremor of something stirred, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Zelira began staying awake longer at night, watching the hearth long after the others were asleep. The fire would die, the logs crumble, and only soft ash would remain. But even before the sun rose, the shapes would form, without her touch. The house grew colder that month and the stepmother grew crueler. She mocked Zelira's sleeping habits, calling her lazy, scolding her for smelling of smoke. The stepsister said she looked like a ghost crawling out of her own grave. Still, Zelira stayed silent. Watching. One night, while she lay curled beside the hearth, something else happened. As the fire cracked its last spark and the shadows grew thick, Zelira saw movement in the ashes, not caused by her, not caused by air. The soot swirled as if stirred by an unseen finger. Lines drew themselves slowly, purposefully. Zelira held her breath. A crown. Clear as moonlight. Not a drawing of a crown, but the symbol of coronation. The same kind etched into the ruins near the river ancients. The same crown that marked the tombs of warrior queens. She trembled. The next day when she awoke it was gone. Only smudges and her soot-covered arms remained. But in her heart, something had shifted. She could feel it. The ashes remembered. They were not just the remains of fire. They were the memory of it. They were watching her. She began to speak to them at night. Not loudly. Not madly. Just soft words whispered like lullabies. Words of longing, questions, and prayers. She told them of her mother, of her dreams, of the unfairness wrapped around her life like chains. And the ashes whispered back, in silence, in shapes, in stories drawn in soot. They showed her visions of queens who rose from nothing. Of rulers who were once mocked. Of warriors who once slept among bones and rose to command flame. They told her she was not forgotten. Zelira began to believe. She stood taller during the day even if her face was still gray with ash. She didn't react when her stepmother shoved her or when her stepsisters laughed. They didn't notice the flicker in her eyes, the flicker of knowledge growing with each message from the hearth. One morning when she awoke, the ashes didn't draw letters. They drew a path. Long before Zelira was born, the kingdom had gathered to hear a prophecy that would change the course of its future. In a smoky chamber lit by oil lamps and incense, the seer spoke, her eyes rolled back, her voice deep with something not entirely her own. From beneath the ashes shall rise the true crown, and none shall steal her light. The prophecy sent ripples through the royal courts. The king, who was young then, laughed it off, calling it a riddle. But one girl in the court did not laugh. She was his cousin, a bright, ambitious young woman named Anaya, who believed it was her birthright to rule. Years passed, and Anaya's dreams of wearing the crown burned brighter than ever. But when the time came to choose the next heir, the council bypassed her. The seer's words still rang in their ears. The crown, they feared, would not settle on a head it did not choose. Anaya was told, not yet. The prophecy hasn't ripened. Humiliated and furious, she left the palace under the guise of travel, but her heart brewed resentment with every step she took. She wandered for months until she came upon a village where a widower raised his daughter alone, Zelira's father. A nobleman with distant ties to the royal bloodline, he was kind, soft-spoken, and wounded still from the loss of his wife. Anaya saw her chance. She wrapped herself in charm and kindness, presented herself as a weary traveler, and won his sympathy. Slowly, carefully, she sank her claws into his world. When he offered her shelter, she accepted. When he offered her his hand in marriage, she did not hesitate. Zelira was just a baby then, sleeping peacefully in her crib. Anaya stood over her the night before the wedding, staring into the infant's round face with a growing dread. In the glow of the hearth, with ash floating in the air like spirits, she saw it. A glimmer. A flicker of something ancient, resting in the child's aura. Her heart sank. The prophecy had not been about her. It had been about this baby, this girl who would grow up in the house she now planned to rule. On their wedding night, Anaya burned sage and whispered words she had learned in secret places, words twisted with bitterness and ancient roots. She bound her curse with a handful of ashes and placed them beneath Zelira's crib. Let her be buried while still breathing. Let her sleep in what is left of my chances. Let the fire never warm her. The curse was subtle, clever. It would not kill. It would bind. Zelira would never rise. She would always be beneath. And the crown, Anaya believed, would be hers in the end. Years passed and the curse worked, at least on the surface. Zelira's place was by the hearth. The warmest room for everyone else but never for her. She slept there, her tiny bed slowly replaced by nothing but the floor. The ashes clung to her hair, darkened her cheeks, filled her nails. Yet even as the soot stained her, her spirit remained unshaken. Anaya noticed this and it unsettled her. The girl should be bitter, broken, silent. But Zelira remained composed, even serene, like she was waiting for something. Anaya doubled down. She gave her daughters everything, silks, perfumes, lessons in etiquette. She made sure Zelira got nothing but leftovers and scorn. When strangers visited, she told them Zelira preferred the ashes, that she was strange, touched by something not quite right. The stepsisters mimicked their mother's cruelty with ease, laughing at the ash ghost in the corner of the room. But nothing seemed to pierce Zelira deeply. It was as if she had armor no one could see. One night, while stirring the hearth, Anaya found Zelira staring into the flames. Not with fear, not with anger, but with knowing. That look chilled her. The fire danced in the girl's eyes like it remembered her. Anaya turned away quickly, but her stomach twisted into knots. Something was slipping. The curse, once firm and final, now frayed at the edges. She began having nightmares, visions of the ashes rising, swirling, shaping themselves into crowns that hovered just above Zelira's head. She'd wake sweating, gasping, clutching at her own temples. In desperation, she consulted an old crone in the woods, the same one who had taught her the curse years ago. But the woman only laughed now. "Ashes don't forget," she rasped. "You buried fire and thought it wouldn't breathe." Anaya demanded a reversal, but the crone refused. "You cannot undo what never truly bound her. You only delayed her. And time," she said, "has a way of bowing to the chosen." Anaya returned home in a frenzy. That night, she tried to lock Zelira in the cellar, far from the hearth. But the door refused to shut. The ashes from the fireplace had somehow gathered beneath it, like a silent protest. The next morning, the soot spelled a word near Zelira's bed, one no one else saw but her: soon. By then, Zelira had stopped questioning the ashes. They were no longer just remnants of fire. They were messages. They were memory. And somewhere, beneath their dusty layers, the truth of her birthright began to breathe. Anaya, now more desperate than ever, demanded the hearth be torn down. But every time they tried, the ashes would not clear. They'd gather again overnight, thick and unmoved, as though something within refused to be exiled. The stepsisters began to avoid the room altogether. Whispers stirred among the servants. They said Zelira's eyes glowed in the dark, that her steps were silent but heavy with something unseen. Anaya knew. Deep in her gut, she understood. The prophecy was not waiting. It was waking. And she, despite all her efforts, had only helped it rise. Zelira pressed her palms into gold ashes, her tears falling in quiet defiance against the silence of the hearth. The soot clung to her skin like memory, like grief that refused to be brushed away. It had been another night of cruel whispers and stifled laughter from her stepmother's daughters. Another night when she was banished from her own bed and forced to lie on the rough bricks, the fire long gone, the warmth stolen by those who claimed to be her family. She curled up tighter, wishing the ashes could close over her and hide her away from the world. The fire was out, yet the hearth always felt strangely alive, breathing with a rhythm only she seemed to feel. And tonight the silence felt different. Denser. Heavy like something waiting. Zelira's breath hitched as a breeze brushed across her cheek, but there were no open windows and no door had moved. The ashes beside her stirred, not just from her own shifting, but as though something beneath them exhaled. Her eyes widened. She dared not move. And then a voice. Soft as smoke, low as coals long buried. "You are the one." Zelira's heart seized in her chest. She sat up slowly, eyes darting around the darkened room. Nothing. No figures. No flicker of flame. Just ashes and shadows. The voice came again. "The crown is not gold. It is fire that does not burn." Zelira's throat tightened. Who's there?" A shape, more suggestion than form, flickered in the soot before her. A faint outline in the air. A woman, perhaps, tall, cloaked in something like smoke and sorrow. Her voice hummed from everywhere and nowhere. "Long ago," the voice murmured, "I was queen. Not by sword or blood, but by the will of the flame. I ruled with wisdom, not fear. But those who craved power could not understand a fire that gave light without consuming. They burned me here in this hearth, thinking they had ended my line." Zelira's lips parted in shock. This very hearth? The ashes stirred again, forming brief patterns beneath her knees, spirals, then symbols, then a flicker of something that looked like a crown. It vanished before she could make sense of it, but she had seen it, felt it. "I do not ask you to avenge me," said the voice. "I ask you to rise." Zelira felt the tears return, but not from sadness. From the strange, swelling weight of truth settling in her bones. "But I'm just a girl in the ashes. They've taken everything from me." "No," the voice replied. "They've given you everything. The ashes are memory. They remember what was done. They remember what will come. They've been waiting for you. Every ember that ever touched this hearth carries my name, and soon, it will carry yours. A warmth lit within her chest, not fire, not fear, but certainty. The voice continued. Your stepmother fears what she cannot control. She knows the prophecy. She knows that beneath the ashes the true crown stirs. She tried to bury it by burying you. But fire does not stay buried. And truth, true flame, finds a way. Zelira clenched her fists. She cursed me. My own father is blind to it. They've turned my life into dust. Dust feeds the roots, said the voice gently. From this hearth, you will rise, not as a princess with silk and pearls, but as a queen of flame and memory. Look closely. The soot is not silent. Zelira reached down, her fingers brushing against the ash-strewn floor. Symbols sparked faintly beneath her touch. Letters. Ancient, twisting shapes she did not recognize with her mind but somehow understood in her bones. They glowed faintly, then faded. What do they say? She whispered. They speak of who you are becoming, said the voice. They remember every injustice. Every tear. Every time you bowed your head and held your tongue while others spat cruelty. The ashes do not forget. And when the time is right, they will speak for you. Zelira's voice trembled. But what if I'm not strong enough? The hearth flickered. A brief, impossible flash of flame, blue and white and beautiful, lit the soot around her. The shape of the smoky queen shimmered again, her presence both fierce and tender. You do not have to be made of fire to carry it, she said. Let the flame live through you. Let it speak in silence. In dignity. In the power of stillness. That is how you will rise. Not with noise, but with heat that melts lies and softens even stone. Zelira swallowed. She no longer felt cold. The smoky figure began to fade, but the voice remained. Sleep now, Zelira. Rest in the ashes tonight. For they will spell out the truth come morning. And when they do, the world will know that the crown has chosen. And with that, silence fell again. But it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence before dawn. Zelira curled once more into the hearth, her breath steady. Her face was marked with soot, but in the darkness, it looked like war paint. The ashes shifted slightly under her weight, and as she closed her eyes, they moved on their own. A circle formed. Then a line. Then a symbol no one else could see, not yet, but one day they would. And it would change everything. Zelira's nights changed after the voice came. Sleep no longer felt like an escape from suffering, it became a passageway into something deeper. The first dream came gently, like a fog rolling in over her mind. She saw a woman in robes made of stars, standing at the edge of a battlefield not made of land but of fire. Around her, kings and warriors clashed, not with swords but with voices, arguing, demanding, trying to seize something invisible. And at the center of it all floated a crown, no gold, no jewels, just a halo of flickering flame, dancing without consuming, bright without burning. Zelira woke gasping, ashes clinging to her cheeks like the residue of prophecy. The symbols had returned, clear this time. A spiral at the center, surrounded by 4 dots, then a long jagged line. It was what she had seen above the battlefield. She touched it and it smudged like breath on glass. But she remembered it. She remembered all of it. Each night after, the dreams came with more force. Sometimes she was inside the dreams, walking barefoot through ancient halls of glass that hummed with forgotten voices. Other nights, she stood above great mountains, watching women place their hands on fire without flinching. Some of them whispered names Zelira didn't know, but felt in her soul like distant relatives calling her home. In one dream, a queen stood on a balcony and dropped a ring of ash onto a map. Wherever it landed, a new forest grew. The crown is not for ruling, she had said. It is for remembering. Zelira woke with those words carved in her chest. And always when morning came, the hearth whispered back. The ashes never looked the same twice. One morning they formed the shape of a bird, wings stretched wide. Another morning they created the outline of a throne made entirely of roots. Once, the ashes spelled a word she didn't recognize in any language she'd learned, but her heart beat faster when she saw it. She began to keep track. She stole scraps of paper from her stepsister's desks and pieces of old wood from the garden shed. At night, once her cruel family was asleep, she would sketch the dream symbols from memory. Curves, spirals, crowns of flame, hands held in prayer, eyes without pupils. Each line was carved into her mind before it hit the page. She hid the drawings beneath the loose floorboard under the hearth, pressing them flat with stones. She was careful, never letting a page slip into view during the day, never letting the sound of her carving be heard over the crackle of the fire. As the pile grew, so did her understanding. Each dream, each ash symbol, told her a little more about the power that slept inside her blood. She began to see patterns. Symbols that repeated. Dreams that looped with small changes. The same queen with different faces. The same crown floating above different lands. Each queen in the dream had eyes like hers. One night, she dreamt of her stepmother. But this time, the woman wasn't shouting or sneering. She was kneeling in a forest, clutching a broken shard of mirror. Her reflection didn't show her own face, it showed Zelira's. The woman cried out, "I tried to burn it from you." And the forest whispered back, "But fire answers only to its own." Zelira woke shaken. The ashes beneath her had formed a perfect ring, just like the one in her earlier dream. In the center, a shape like a seed. She knew then that her stepmother's curse had failed. Whatever the woman had feared, whatever she had tried to suppress, it had not withered. It had grown. The dreams were proof. The ashes were proof. But still, Zelira said nothing. Let them think she was quiet and broken. Let them believe she had no fight, no fire. Let them believe the curse had worked. Because something deeper was happening now, something older than the palace, older than bloodlines. She was being prepared. There were times, of course, when doubt crept in. When her stepsisters mocked her soot-streaked face, or when her father glanced at her as though she were a shadow in his house. There were moments she questioned if the dreams were just dreams, if the symbols were just tricks of the soot. But then another image would form, another dream would pull her under, and she would feel it again, that deep, unshakable pull toward something larger than herself. She began to feel fire in her fingertips, not in a burning sense, but in a way that warmed from within, like courage. The ashes weren't just responding to her. They were learning from her. And she was learning from them. She remembered the Spirit's words, "The crown is not gold. It is fire that does not burn." That fire was starting to live in her bones now. Not to destroy but to shape. Not to rule but to restore. And so each morning she'd wipe the soot from her skin, tuck the drawings deeper beneath the floorboards, and smile softly to herself, because she knew. These ashes weren't her prison. They were her inheritance. The night the storm came, the skies tore open with a rage that seemed almost personal. Thunder cracked like bones breaking, and the wind howled through the cracks in the house like something long buried trying to rise. The stepmother and her daughters huddled in the upper rooms, afraid the storm would pull the roof away. But Zelira, as always, was left by the hearth, alone with the ash, the cold stone, and the whispers no one else could hear. The storm outside was a reflection of what stirred inside her. That day, her stepmother had struck her across the face for singing to herself. A small, harmless melody from her dreams, but that was enough. "You'll never be more than a girl in soot," the woman had hissed. "No song will crown you. No fire will favor you." Zelira hadn't spoken back. She had only touched the hearth as if to comfort it, and strangely, the ash had curled beneath her fingertips like it understood. Now, with lightning splitting the sky and the wind screaming through the trees, Zelira sat awake, staring into the sleeping coals. The fire had long since died down. Only embers remained, dull and red and still. But as the storm grew louder, something stirred in the heart of the ashes. A flicker. A twitch of light. Zelira leaned forward. No one else would dare come near the hearth tonight. Even the boldest of her stepsisters were terrified of fire during storms. But she was not. Then, without spark, without breath, without reason, the flames leapt high from the ashes. They roared to life in a column of gold and white, stretching upward like they had something urgent to say. Zelira flinched but didn't retreat. The fire was not wild, it was awake. It saw her. And it knew her. She raised her hands without thinking, palms open, as though greeting an old friend. The flames danced higher. And then, impossibly, they reached for her. They licked her fingers, wrapped around her wrists, curled across her forearms, heatless, painless, bright as dawn. Zelira gasped, but she didn't scream. Her hands glowed, not like fire but like memory. Like truth. Images flooded her, flashes of the ancient queens, battles not fought but endured, crowns passed not through blood but through trial. And all of them had held fire. Not in torches, not in weapons, but in their hands. Fire that did not burn. Fire that did not destroy. Fire that revealed. Her chest rose and fell like she had run a great distance. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the fire died down. The room fell silent again, save for the storm outside. Zelira sat in the glow of what had just happened, her palms still warm, though no flame remained. She looked at her hands, half expecting them to bear scars. But there were none. Only a faint shimmer remained, like her skin had been dusted with starlight. She curled her fingers slowly, then opened them again. Something had changed. She didn't know how, but the fire had left something in her. A seed. A spark. A knowing. And when she finally lay down beside the hearth, soot cushioning her like a blanket, she smiled despite the cold. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, hesitant and pale after the storm. Zelira's stepmother came downstairs, muttering about the weather, the mud, the inconvenience of nature. But then she saw it. There, in the center of the hearth, where ashes should have been scattered in the usual chaos of sleep, was a perfect crown. Not drawn. Not carved. Formed. The ash had shaped itself into a delicate circlet of spirals and flame-like points. It looked like something forged by hands older than time. There was no smudge, no broken edge. It was too intricate for any human hand to have made overnight. Zelira stood nearby, quiet as ever, her face unreadable. Her stepmother blinked and stepped closer. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The other daughters appeared behind her, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They saw the crown too, and all of them froze. For once no one spoke. Not to scold, not to mock, not even to question. The hearth, always seen as Zelira's prison, now stood like an altar. The ash had become scripture. The crown was not a symbol, they all felt it. It was a message. Zelira said nothing. She didn't need to. Her stepmother stared at her, eyes narrowed, not in confusion but in fear. She opened her mouth once more as if to accuse, but the words caught like smoke in her throat. She turned away sharply and left the room. The others followed, silent, not daring to look Zelira in the eyes. When she was finally alone again, Zelira knelt beside the crown. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She only whispered, "I hear you." The ashes stirred. Not all storms destroy. Some awaken. And that morning, Zelira understood the fire's message. She was not waiting to be chosen. She had already been crowned. The kingdom bustled with anticipation. Banners were hung from balconies, trumpets sounded through cobbled streets, and whispers danced like pollen in the air. The king, growing old and weary, had announced a rare festival, not one of harvest nor of war's end, but of legacy. It was time, he declared, for the land to know its next queen. Not through marriage or bloodline, but through signs foretold by the stars, signs written long ago. Asterisk, she will rise through what others discard. She will be crowned where none dare kneel. And fire will know her name. Asterisk. So he summoned every noble daughter from the edges of the kingdom. They came in silks that shimmered like peacock feathers, adorned in gold and perfume, trained to curtsy and smile. They rehearsed songs, recited verses, danced with precision. They believed the queen would be chosen from among them, one who glittered, who obeyed, who could be shaped like clay. None imagined the girl who would rise had slept for years in a hearth, her name rarely spoken aloud, her worth buried beneath soot. Zelira heard of the festival not from an announcement or a messenger, but from the whispers of the fire. That morning, while she swept the ashes as she always did, the soot twisted into a shape she recognized from her dreams. A crown tilted slightly, followed by a spiral that meant gathering. The fire knew. The fire remembered. But her stepmother had heard too. She stormed into the room, eyes wild, clutching a letter from the palace with trembling hands. "No," she hissed, watching Zelira closely. "You will not go. You are nothing. You were born of ash, and ash you'll remain." And with that, she dragged Zelira by the wrist down into the cellar, past old barrels and dusty jars, into the darkness. She shoved her inside and locked the wooden door behind her. The click of the bolt sounded final. "Let the fire crown the rats," the woman spat. Zelira sat in the dark, the air thick with mildew and old sorrow. She did not cry. Instead, she placed her palm gently on the cold stone floor. "I'm ready," she whispered. The cellar was still. Then slowly a draft moved through the room, warm and dry despite the damp air. Ashes blew in under the door, swirling like wind through smoke. They danced in circles around Zelira, lifting slightly into the air, gathering and forming, coiling, knotting, stretching. A key. Forged not in iron but in memory. It floated into her hand, warm like breath, and when she stood and placed it into the rusted lock, it turned effortlessly. The door creaked open and Zelira stepped into the corridor. Her clothes were torn and gray. Her skin was smudged with soot. She wore no jewels, no silk, no shoes. But as she stepped into the light of the courtyard and out into the festival air, something shifted. The crowd parted. Not from disgust nor pity. Something deeper. As if their bones remembered a story their minds had forgotten. She walked slowly, steadily, each footstep leaving a faint mark of ash behind. The nobles fell silent. The music faltered. Even the king, seated upon his raised platform beneath a golden canopy, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who is she?" he asked. No one answered. Zelira did not bow. She did not perform. She simply looked at the king with calm eyes. And the fire in the ceremonial torches flared. The high priestess stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Sire, she walks in soot, yet the flame bows to her." The king stood. "What is your name?" Zelira lifted her chin. "I have been called many names. Ash girl. Nothing. Curse. But the hearth knows me as Zelira." Murmurs swept through the crowd. The king nodded once. "Come forward." As Zelira approached the dais, the stepmother, watching from the edge of the crowd in horrified disbelief, tried to cry out, to protest. But her voice failed. She felt her throat close, tight with fear or fate she didn't know. Zelira stopped before the throne. The king looked into her eyes and saw no ambition, no flattery. Only fire. Controlled, ancient, and waiting. "Tell me," he said, "why do you come with no invitation, no wealth, no name of power?" Zelira looked down at her ash-covered hands, then back at the king. "Because the fire called. And the fire never lies." Then, without thunder, without wind, each brazier in the square ignited in perfect unison. The flame rose, not high but bright. Warm, welcoming. A hush fell over the festival. From above the throne, a banner unfurled. Not placed by any hand but loosed by something unseen. Upon it, embroidered in white thread, was a crown surrounded by soot. The king stared, heart pounding. The old prophecy returned to him like a childhood song. Asterisk, from beneath the ashes, the true crown shall rise. Asterisk. And standing before him was a girl who had risen not through force nor favor, but through flame. He stepped down from the dais. And then, to the shock of all, he knelt. Not as a king. As a father. As one who had forgotten. "I see you now," he said softly. "Daughter of flame." And Zelira smiled, not in triumph but in recognition. The ashes had always known. And now so did the world. Ready for the next part, bro? The hall was draped in velvet and silk, every surface polished, every corner adorned with gold and pearl. Nobles lined the edges, their mouths full of honeyed words and dried fruit, their eyes scanning every girl for signs of grace or bloodline. At the center, upon a pedestal framed by twin torches, stood the royal crown, gleaming, sharp, cold with the weight of heritage. It was to be placed upon the head of the chosen queen, the girl the stars would favor. But the flames in the torches trembled. The grand doors creaked open. And in stepped Zelira. No one announced her name. No trumpet sounded. She wore soot instead of jewels, her hair dusted with ash rather than scented oil. Yet the silence that followed was deafening. One by one eyes turned toward her. Not in scorn. Not in laughter. In fear. In awe. She walked slowly as if guided by something unseen, her feet bare against marble. The crowd began to back away, almost without realizing it. Dresses rustled. Beads clinked. Whispers rose like steam in a bathhouse. She walks like she belongs. But she's not on the list. She's the girl from the hearth. She's the girl from the ashes. A sharp crack echoed. All heads turned to the pedestal. The crown, perfect and cold, had begun to tremble. Then it cracked. A jagged line snaked through its silver like lightning through a dark sky. Jewels popped loose. The metal shivered. Then, melted. It did not fall. It dripped, slow and steady, forming a puddle of glinting metal at the base of the stand. Gasps swept the hall like wind through dry leaves. Before anyone could speak, a current of ash spiraled into the chamber. It danced through the air, flowing from the hearth, from candles, from burnt offerings at the altar. The ashes circled above Zelira's head, weightless, pulsing as if breathing. Then they began to shape themselves. A lobe, a second, a peak, a curl, a crown. Forged not from gold but memory. Born of every tear shed into the ashes. Every night slept beside cinders. Every whisper of pain the flames had carried. The ash crown hovered above Zelira's head, glowing faintly, not with heat but with knowing. The priestess dropped her staff. One noblewoman fainted. And the king, old, wise and weary, rose from his throne, eyes wide. "The fire has chosen," he whispered. Zelira did not speak. She didn't need to. The ashes that crowned her spoke enough. They whispered in symbols, in feelings, in echoes of stories long buried. They reminded the room of the prophecy. From beneath the ashes the true crown shall rise. The stepmother, standing at the edge, went pale. She shook her head, muttering, "No, no, not her, not her." She tried to speak louder, to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the thick, smoky air. The fire had turned against her now. It recognized who had suffered. It remembered who had been forgotten. A wind swirled through the hall, though no doors opened. The torches flared. The melted crown hissed and spat before vanishing entirely, absorbed into the marble like it had never existed. Zelira stood, unmoving, the ash crown glowing above her head. Her soot-covered skin shimmered under the flames. And then, as if stirred by some sacred memory, people began to kneel. One by one. First the priestess. Then the court musicians. Then nobles, hesitant at first but unable to deny what they felt in their bones. Even those who had mocked her, who had spat the word servant or hearth girl, found themselves bowing low. The king knelt last. He looked up into her face. Tears lined his cheeks. "I did not know," he whispered. "I did not see." Zelira met his gaze. "You were not meant to until now." A hush followed. The ash crown descended slowly. It did not touch her. It hovered, neither heavy nor light but eternal. Zelira inhaled and the flames flickered with her breath. Somewhere deep beneath the palace the old stones sighed. A weight had shifted. A wrong was righted. A queen had returned, not in robes or riches, but through soot and fire and patience so profound it could not be taught. The priestess stood slowly. "The crown," she said, voice steady now, "is no longer forged in gold. It remembers. It listens. And it has chosen." From the corners of the room, servants wept. The ashes drifted through the air like feathers, touching cheeks, settling on shoulders. Where they landed they burned nothing but left warmth. A kind of awakening. A kind of peace. The stepmother turned and ran. But the doors would not open. The fire had closed them. And Zelira, now standing taller than ever before, turned slightly, just enough to see her retreat. She didn't smile. She didn't scold. She didn't need revenge. The crown itself was justice. The people began to chant, not her name, not her title, but her truth. She rose through ash. She wears the unseen flame. She is the ash crown girl. And Zelira, daughter of cinders, child of prophecy, survivor of silence, took her first step forward, not as a servant, but as the queen foretold. "No!" the stepmother shrieked, stumbling forward. Her voice, once commanding, now cracked like splintered wood. "This is trickery. Witchcraft. She's cursed the flames. She's twisted the ash to deceive you." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but none moved to support her. She pointed at Zelira, who stood calm and still beneath the floating crown of ash, her hands folded gently in front of her. The very air around her hummed with quiet power. "She is not chosen, she is dangerous," the stepmother spat. "She bewitches you all." The king, still on his knees, lifted his gaze, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. He turned to Zelira, who remained silent, her eyes locked on the hearth. Suddenly the flames surged. Not outward. Not to attack. They rose as if pulled by something ancient and deep. The hearth roared, not with fury but with memory. The torches lining the walls flared in unison. The warmth in the room turned sharper, heavier. The ashes lifted from the ground and formed a spiral around the stepmother. She screamed, stumbling back, but the ashes chased her. They danced around her face, her arms, her feet, growing faster. Then they began to glow faintly, and with them came images, memories pulled from smoke and soot and sin. The first vision rose into the air. The stepmother at the king's library late at night, burning scrolls that bore the ancient prophecy. She laughed as the parchment curled, destroying the line that spoke of the ash-born flame. Another image followed, her standing over Zelira's cradle, whispering an incantation, sealing the girl's fate with a curse laced in bitterness and fear. The baby had cried, not from hunger but from the weight of a future denied. The crowd cried out. More visions appeared, truths hidden until now. The stepmother's secret meetings with exiled warlords. Her bribery of the palace priest to rewrite omens. Her hand in the sudden illness that took the former queen, Zelira's mother. "No, stop it," she cried, slashing at the air. The ashes did not listen. They responded not to fear but to guilt. Each lie she'd told, each wrong she'd hidden, was dragged into the light of fire and born in the breath of cinder. Zelira still did not speak. She didn't need to. The hearth was speaking for her now. The nobles backed away from the stepmother. The priestess picked up her staff, standing firm beside Zelira. Even the guards stepped forward, not to protect the former queen, but to surround her in judgment. The stepmother fell to her knees. "I only wanted what I was owed," she hissed, voice low, bitter. "They told me I'd never wear the crown, that it was never meant for me. But why should it belong to a child? Why should the fire choose someone born in the dirt?" Her words hung in the air. Then Zelira spoke, softly, yet every corner of the hall heard her. "Because the dirt knows the roots. Because the ashes remember truth, even when tongues forget. And because the fire, unlike men, does not lie." The stepmother raised her head slowly, her eyes red with rage and fear. "Then what of mercy?" she spat. Zelira's gaze didn't falter. "Mercy is for those who regret. Do you?" The stepmother hesitated, but only for a moment. Her pride refused to bow, even as the ashes revealed her. "I regret nothing," she snarled. The king stood now, shoulders heavy with the realization of all he had missed, all he had allowed. His voice trembled not with fear but fury. "You raised my daughter in soot and chains. You lied, murdered, burned truths meant for generations. You cursed my blood." Still kneeling, the stepmother turned to him. "I did what I had to." The priestess stepped forward now, lifting her staff. "Then you shall receive what you've earned." The flames twisted into a whirlwind. The ashes spun faster around the stepmother, not burning her, not yet, but surrounding her in a cage of truth. From the whirlwind rose voices, not spoken ones but remembered ones. Zelira's voice as a child, crying for her mother. Servants whispering of cruel orders. The mourning song of the queen, whose death had never been fully explained. "She is not fit for flame," said the priestess. "Let her live, but never return." The ashes exploded outward, then fell suddenly, covering the floor in a soft gray layer. The stepmother was gone. Not dead. Banished. A spell sealed the doors behind her, carved by ash itself. Her name was scratched from the royal scrolls, her portrait burned from the walls. The fire had decided. And fire, once it speaks, does not unsay its truth. The hall was silent again. Zelira lowered her head. The ash crown pulsed once, glowing as if in approval, then resumed its quiet hover. The people looked to her not with pity, not with curiosity but with reverence. The fire had spoken. The lies were ash. And the queen had risen. The golden crown lay untouched on the velvet cushion, gleaming under the sunlight that filtered through the stained glass windows of the royal hall. Courtiers waited, holding their breath, expecting Zelira to step forward, to take the symbol of rule, to place it upon her head and seal her reign. But she did not. Instead she walked past it. Not with defiance. Not even with dismissal. But with a quiet purpose that made even the oldest of nobles bow their heads in silent understanding. Her steps echoed in the hall as she approached the great hearth, the place that had been her prison, her teacher, and now her throne. Zelira knelt and placed both hands into the cool ash. She did not cry. She simply sat in silence, pressing her palms together, lifting a small mound of ash into her cupped hands as if it were gold. "I do not need a crown to rule," she said softly, though her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "I need only truth. And truth lies not in gold, but in what remains after all else has burned." A murmur rippled through the hall. Some were confused. Others were moved. And a few wept, not from sadness but from something deeper. Reverence, perhaps. Or hope. That evening, Zelira returned to the hearth. Alone, save for the guards who now bowed to her rather than watched her. She carried with her a clay bowl, simple and unmarked, and the seed of a tree that once grew in her mother's garden before it was cut down and burned. She dug into the stone beside the hearth, breaking it open with her bare hands, until the earth beneath revealed itself. There she placed the seed. Around it she poured the ashes, ashes of the old queen, of burned scrolls, of sorrow and sacrifice, of stories once silenced. Then gently she placed the bowl beside the growing roots and whispered, "Let what was destroyed now nourish what will become." She poured water into the bowl. And the next morning a sapling sprouted. From then on, Zelira ruled not from a throne of iron, but seated beside the hearth. The ash bowl remained at its base, never moved, always replenished. She listened to it daily. Every dawn she sifted the ashes with her fingers. The shapes that formed became her guide. If a question arose in court, she would consult the ashes. If someone lied, the soot would twist and turn in warning. If a plea was true, the fire would warm. Those who doubted her magic soon stopped questioning. Because time proved the ashes never lied. People from distant lands traveled to see the queen who wore no crown, but left swearing they had seen a crown, briefly at sunrise in the smoke behind her. They swore the ashes took shape when she spoke. that the fire bowed when she entered the room. Zalaira never denied it. Nor did she claim it. She let the truth speak for itself. Under her rule the kingdom changed. Justice became swift but fair. No bribes were taken. The ash revealed every lie. Thieves trembled before the hearth more than before any blade. And if a ruler from afar wished war, Zalaira would consult the flames. And sometimes when the fire grew cold, it meant war would come, but only if there was no other path. More often she found another way. She never married. Many suitors tried. Princes, emperors, warriors with chests full of gold. But Zalaira would sit beside the hearth, and the ashes would remain still, cold, unstirred. Until one day a woman arrived from the northern isles, carrying no jewels and riding no horse, only bearing a branch carved with fire runes. When she stood beside Zalaira, the flames danced. And for the first time the ashes spelled out two crowns, one of flame and one of wind. But even then Zalaira did not take her as queen. They simply ruled together. Not with power but with purpose. Children were taught not just royal history but how to read ash. Elders were invited to the hearth to share stories, because Zalaira believed memory lived in soot but grew in voices. The sapling beside the hearth grew tall. Its leaves glistened silver by moonlight. Birds sang only in its branches. It was said that if you touched its bark while whispering a lie, the tree would hum with disapproval. If your truth was heavy, it would shed a single leaf in your hand. The golden crown was never worn. It remained where it had been placed, gathering dust. One day it simply cracked down the middle. People began calling Zalaira not Your Majesty, but Ash-crowned. And she accepted it. Because the crown she wore could not be touched. It hovered in the morning mist. It lived in the dreams of the people. It flickered in the firelight when justice was spoken. It bloomed in the roots of the tree. It danced in the soot of every hearth. Years passed. Zalaira aged, but her fire never dimmed. Children would gather at her feet to hear her speak, not of power but of listening, of watching, of feeling the world's truth, not forcing it. And on the day she left the world they found no body. Only footprints in ash, leading into the fire. The hearth burned brighter than ever. The tree's leaves turned gold. And in the bowl of ashes for the first time, every citizen who looked saw the same crown. It hovered briefly, then vanished. But they remembered. Because ashes always remember.